The Chess Records press session was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in 1962. The photographer arrived early, as he always arrived early, and set up his equipment in the way he had set it up for dozens of sessions before this one. The lights positioned to give the artist something flattering without looking too arranged. The backdrop neutral enough to work across a range of skin tones and clothing choices. The camera loaded and the exposure calculated for the conditions in the room. He had photographed most of the Chess Records roster by this point. He knew what these sessions were. They were not artistic exercises. They were production jobs. The label needed photographs for promotional materials, for the covers of releases, for the trade press and the consumer press, and the various places that required a recognizable face to accompany a recognizable name. The photographer was good at his job, which was the job of making the artist look like what the label needed the artist to look like. He was also, underneath the professional competence, a man who had been paying attention for years. He had been in rooms with extraordinary people, musicians and singers whose talent he understood, from the accumulation of all those sessions, with a specificity that the general public never had. He knew what Muddy Waters looked like when the camera was on him and when it wasn't. He knew what Chuck Berry's face did in the second between takes. He knew how the Chess Records artists sat in the space between the formal requirements of a press session and the informal space that came when the session paused, who they were when they weren't being photographed. He kept notes. This was not standard practice for a commercial photographer in 1962, and he has never been entirely sure why he started doing it. The notes were not technical. They were not records of exposure settings or lighting configurations, or the logistics of a session. They were observations, the kind that accumulate when you spend a great deal of time watching people who don't know you're watching, or who have forgotten you're watching, or who have decided that a photographer is close enough to furniture that they don't need to manage what they show. He photographed Etta James for the first time on a Tuesday morning in 1962. He set up the lights. He loaded the camera. He waited for her to arrive. She arrived late. Not dramatically late, just the ordinary lateness of someone whose morning had not cooperated with the schedule someone else had set for it. She came in without apology and without explanation, and looked at the setup in the way that experienced performers look at a photography setup, assessing what it was going to require, calculating the version of herself it was designed to produce, preparing to give it. The session began. He wrote about it that evening. The notes he kept about photography sessions were not usually written the same day. They accumulated over days and weeks, as the observations from a session continued to surface in the way that things surface when you've been paying close attention to something and haven't yet processed all of what you saw. But the Etta James session produced something that he wanted to record before the day was over. What he wrote was not an account of the session itself. He wrote about the pauses, about the specific quality of the stillness she had in the space between the formal requirements, and about why it was different from the stillness he had seen in other performers, and about the particular difficulty he was having finding the right way to describe what made it different. He went through several attempts in the notes. He tried describing it in terms of what she wasn't doing. She wasn't performing. She wasn't managing. She wasn't preparing for the next shot. He tried describing it in terms of what it reminded him of, the way certain people look when they are thinking deeply about something, the way musicians sometimes look when they are hearing a song in their heads. None of these descriptions satisfied him, because they all described what was absent rather than what was present. And what was present was the thing he was trying to capture. He finally arrived at something like this. What Etta James looked like in the pauses was what she would look like if no one had ever told her she was supposed to look a certain way in front of other people. Not naive, not the look of someone who didn't know they were being seen. The look of someone who had decided, at some point, that the knowledge of being seen was not sufficient reason to change what they showed. He found this remarkable, not because it was unusual in private people. Many private people had exactly this quality, the ability to remain themselves in the presence of others without the management that public life typically required. He found it remarkable because of where he was seeing it. He was seeing it in a chess records press session, in a room where the entire purpose was to produce a specific image of a specific artist for a specific commercial use. In a room that was explicitly designed to manage what Etta James showed, she was not managing it. Not performing the management, not resisting it visibly, not making a statement about it. Simply not doing it, in the particular way of someone for whom the alternative had never fully taken hold. He did not share the notes for 40 years. Not because they were sensitive. They were not. They contained nothing damaging or private in any conventional sense. He didn't share them because every time he considered sharing them, he tried to explain what he meant and couldn't make it comprehensible to someone who hadn't been in the room. The photographs were comprehensible. The notes were something else. The session produced what sessions produced. Usable photographs. Etta James in the approved postures, with the approved expressions, in the clothing and the light that the label had determined would serve the promotional purposes the photographs were intended to serve. The photographer did his job. She did hers. The camera ran through its exposures. The session moved at the pace that sessions moved. What the photographer noticed during the pauses between setups was something the camera was not running to capture. Press sessions have a rhythm, the intense focus of the shooting, when every element is arranged and the photographer is making decisions at speed and the subject is holding the required position and expression, and then the pause, when the film is being changed, or the lights are being adjusted, or the photographer is reviewing what he has to determine what he still needs. The pause is not part of the session in the formal sense. It is the space between the session's requirements. In that space, the subjects of press sessions do various things. Some performers maintained the professional composure of the shoot through the pause, remained in the approximate position, held the approximate expression, stayed inside the version of themselves the session was constructing. Others stepped entirely out of it, sat down, picked up a phone, spoke to whoever was with them, stopped being the subject, and became simply a person in a room. The photographer had seen both, and many gradations between them, and he had developed a working understanding of what the transition revealed. What Etta James did in the pauses was neither of these things. She did not maintain the session posture. She did not perform the label's version of Etta James for a room that wasn't watching, but she also did not step entirely out of it, did not become the ordinary afternoon version of herself that appeared when the professional requirements were suspended. What she became, in the pauses, was something that the photographer had not seen in the same form before, in all the chess records sessions he had done. She became still. Not the stillness of someone who is tired, or waiting, or managing the boredom of a commercial session that is taking longer than expected. A different kind of stillness, interior, almost private. The stillness of a person who has found a very quiet place inside themselves and is simply there. Her face in the pauses was not the face of the press session, not the arranged expression, not the performance of ease or warmth or whatever the shot required. It was a face that was not performing anything at all. A face that was simply present, looking at nothing in particular, existing in the particular way that people exist when they believe no one is looking at them. The photographer was looking at her. He did not, in those pauses, lift the camera. The photographs from that session were used. They appeared in the places that Chess Records press photographs appeared, in trade publications, on promotional materials, in the growing archive of images that constructed the public version of Etta James through the early 1960s. They were good photographs, competent and flattering, the product of a professional doing his job well in a context that made specific demands. They show the Etta James that the session was designed to produce, posed, assembled, the particular version of herself that served the label's promotional needs. They are true in the way that press photographs are true. They represent what actually happened. They are not fabrications. But they are also, the photographer has always understood, incomplete. The session captured what it was designed to capture. It did not capture the pauses. The notes describe something that the photographs cannot. They describe a quality that was present and visible and available, had anyone been looking, in the space between the shots, a quality that the photographs were designed to replace with something more manageable. The photographs show Etta James as she was arranged to appear. The notes describe Etta James as she appeared when she wasn't being arranged. He returned to the notes several times over the following decades. Not obsessively. They were not the most important thing he had ever written, and he was a practical man who did not attach excessive significance to professional observations about people he had photographed once. But he returned to them because the thing he had tried to describe remained, over the decades, incompletely described. He would read what he had written and feel that he had gotten close but not there, that the words had reached for something and fallen short of it. He was still working on the description, in some form, when he heard that Etta James had died in January 2012. What he understood in the days after her death was that the thing he had been trying to describe for 40 years was also the thing that had made her extraordinary as an artist. The quality of remaining entirely yourself in the presence of a room that is explicitly asking you to be something else. The refusal to let the session, or the press, or the label, or the industry, or the audience produce a version of you that required you to step out of what you actually were. He had seen it in the pauses of a Tuesday morning in 1962, in a room set up to produce a specific image of a specific artist. He had seen it clearly enough to know it was there. He had not, in 40 years, found the exact words for it. But the photographs exist. And in the spaces between the poses, in the fraction of a second before the subject settles into the required expression, in the brief pause when the professional requirements have not yet fully claimed the person they are asking something of, there is something that the camera, almost by accident, sometimes catches. Something that looks like a person who had decided, long before anyone had asked her to, that being seen was not the same as being changed by being seen. That was Etta James. That was always Etta James.